Hello, everyone, and welcome to Slash Film Daily for Monday, July 29th, 2019. On today's episode, we're going to talk about Disney's The Lion King. Ben went to the set of this film, and we're going to hear all about it, and we're going to hear an interview with director Jon Favreau. This is Slash Film editor-in-chief Peter Sciretta. And joining me on today's podcast is Slash Film senior writer Ben Pearson.
Hey, what's going on?
Not much. It's Monday again. And today we're talking about the Lion King set visit, which is unusual because usually we talk about these set visits leading up to the film's release, but we're talking about this after the film has hit theaters. Why is that?
Yeah, so basically what happened was Disney decided that the stuff that we learned on the set visit, I think, and this is sort of like me speculating. I didn't get like an official answer on this, but I think it's that the stuff that we learned on the set visit is a lot of technical aspects of like actually how Jon Favreau and his team made this movie. And it seems to me as if Disney wanted people to just experience the movie as a thing, you know, on its own without necessarily being impacted or clouded in any way by thinking about how it was made. Which, like, I can understand because this movie is so technically advanced. It totally makes sense if that was actually their mentality here.
Yeah, you don't want to be watching this movie thinking about how these lions are working. So when you visited the set of The Lion King, they flew you out to Africa?
Yeah, it's interesting because I felt like I was standing on the African savannah, and I got to see Pride Rock, and the sky looked incredible. This giant rhinoceros rumbled past a couple feet right next to me. But I was actually in what they call Silicon Beach, which is like Playa Vista, California. It's, I don't know, about an hour away from my house in Los Angeles. And it's sort of where like Google and Facebook and Instagram and all of those companies have offices, and it was just basically in a what looked to be like a nondescript building, and that's where they shot this whole thing. And the reason that I got to see all of that African savannah stuff was because I was looking at it through a VR headset, which I'm sure if you've seen behind the scenes photos of Favreau and his team at this point, you realize that most of this movie was made in virtual reality before it actually, you know, was translated and I guess like the way that they explained it to us was they shot it in like a basic version in virtual reality, and then, you know, got all the shots fixed and the character movements correct and all that stuff, and then they handed that off to a team of animators that like refined all of that into the, you know, photorealistic version that you see on screen.
See, I was on the set of The Jungle Book, which was filmed in like downtown Los Angeles in like a studio warehouse. But with that, there was a human actor who was being filmed live. And then there was, you know, people doing performances around him. And there was a little bit of like set design. Any place that he walked, there was set design. But here, like, the entire frame is computer created, right?
Yeah, it was wild. It was so, if you guys watched the video that I made about how Digital Domain and the team at Weta created Thanos, you probably know that they shot a lot, or they shoot a lot of these movies in what is called a volume, which is like a huge empty room basically that has cameras and stuff placed around it and markers and stuff on the ground for them to be able to figure out the visual effects angle. And that's what happened here. They took the cast into this room and they recorded them with, you know, they had like a bunch of different cameras and stuff, but it wasn't like motion capture or performance capture. They weren't trying to they didn't put dots on their faces to get the actual expressions from the actor to transfer in a one-to-one way over to the lion, because it doesn't really work that way. So what they did this time was basically they just shot the actors walking around and interacting with each other and just sort of tracked how they moved within a space. So like if a character would shoot a glance, if an actor would shoot a glance at another actor, they would mark that down and hand that to the animators, and they would try to incorporate little things like that into the animations of the lions or the hyenas or whatever. So it wasn't necessarily like a, you know, like Robin Williams standing in the booth and them trying to capture his facial performance in animation, because as you guys know from the what we see in this version of The Lion King, there's not really much expressiveness going on with these photorealistic animals' faces. So it was more about body language and distance between characters and stuff like that. It was a really fascinating approach.
Yeah, and I've been to some sets, like, say, John Carter of Mars. Like, the alien creatures there are taller, so they had to, like, wear, like, these heads on top of the actor's head to represent the eye line, so the actors could be looking at that. Was there anything like that here where, like, they had to represent how tall or big these different animals were?
I don't think so, because they weren't really trying to capture, like, eye lines in the exact. Yeah. It was more just like a vague sense of, like, how, if a person is scared, it was almost like incorporating aspects of, like, a stage production into the basic information that Favreau and his team would hand off to these artists who try to incorporate all of that stuff into the visual effects of the movie. And they had, you mentioned every single shot was filmed in virtual reality and filmed in CG, it, like, created out of nothing. The Lion King, the difference there is that you had a human element, you had actual cameras filming this kid with a bunch of blue screen backgrounds and stuff. Here, you actually have a camera, but it's not a film camera. It's like a camera that is hooked into the VR world. And they had, one of the really interesting things was they had, like, a Steadicam rig and, like, a crane with a, like a jib arm where a camera would normally be hung from that. And they actually had, like dolly tracks on the ground, which are like these metal tubes where you can roll, like, a wheel-mounted cart across it and to sort of create this smooth tracking shot effect. So they had all of that actually in this volume, this huge empty warehouse, basically. But it was all connected to the virtual space. So they were telling me that they had 15 feet of dolly tracks, right? That's all they had, and it sort of curved a little bit. But they were explaining that, like, it's because it's all encoded data. They can change how long the dolly track in the shot actually is. So they can do a 15-foot dolly track in VR where 1 foot equals 1 foot, or they can do this 15-foot dolly track in the real world where 1 foot in the virtual world equals 50 feet. So they can track 150 feet in VR where the camera sort of goes over a mountain and has a loop in it or something, even though they're moving in the same physical space in that volume. It's sort of like mind-blowing stuff to think about.
That is crazy. I mean, I have experienced, like, even as long ago, I think some people will think this is ridiculous, but, like, for Monsters vs. Aliens, that DreamWorks animation movie, I remember experiencing for the first time that virtual camera where you could walk around a room and, like, film what has been animated from whatever angle you wanted. Like, studios like DreamWorks and Pixar have been doing that for a while now to try to get a less, when you have those, like, large sweeping shots that, like, go over a mountain, I think you just mentioned, sometimes it can feel like you're in a computer. Like, it's too perfect, and, like, people have been trying to make it feel more handheld. But now it's insane that you can make a 15 feet of dolly track be, thousands of feet.
Yeah.
What else were you impressed with what you saw on set?
I mean, there was so much, and I wrote this extensive behind-the-scenes set visit piece that I would encourage everybody to read, because I basically went to the set, Peter, on December 7th, 2017, and today is when they finally released the embargo. So it's been, a long time coming, and I spent a long time off and on just sort of, like, chipping away at this piece and trying to get it to a point where people can understand how this movie was actually made. And I'm really, really proud of how it turned out, because I think I was able to translate this tech speak into something that people can actually wrap their brains around a little bit. But there's some really, kind of, again, mind-blowing stuff where it's like, there's a separate piece that I talked about or that I wrote where the filmmakers and everybody involved talked about how the technology that they're using on this movie could change entertainment as we know it today. And Rob Legato, who's a Oscar-winning visual effects supervisor who worked on Avatar and a bunch of other stuff, he worked on The Jungle Book with Jon Favreau, basically talked about how you can make The Godfather again with this technology. And I'll just sort of leave that as a little tease for people to go read that article. But they mentioned, like,
that's frightening.
Yeah, I know it is. It's kind of strange. They mentioned, like, how artificial intelligence could factor into this, because, especially with this creating everything in a virtual world first, when I was a kid, Peter, I always used to wonder, like, what did my favorite characters, what were they doing when the camera wasn't on them? Before I understood actually how movies were made.
Yeah.
And this guy, Ben Grossman, who was a virtual production supervisor who won an Oscar for his work on Martin Scorsese's Hugo, he was telling us that basically what this can be is sort of like a real life Westworld scenario, where if you create a world in virtual reality, like they did for The Lion King, and you're just over here, at Pride Rock filming, with a virtual camera filming actions of some characters. That doesn't mean necessarily that the rest of the world around it that you've created has to stop. If you put artificial intelligence into that world, new stories can form that you don't even have any awareness of what's going on, and you might have to just turn the camera around and see what's going on. It's that kind of stuff where we've never really had the ability to do that before. That kind of stuff that's only been fodder for science fiction stories seems to be getting closer and closer to reality now, which is really sort of scary and interesting at the same time.
Well, that is interesting. I'll put links to both of those pieces in the show notes, along with that Thanos video that you did. It has like over 1 million views, by the way.
Yeah.
It's insane. But now we wanted to present an interview from the set.
Yeah, so we got to speak with a bunch of people, the producers and the visual effects people, but Jon Favreau was actually really, really generous with his time. He spoke with us for probably, 45 minutes or an hour or something on that day, which is pretty rare for a director, especially of a project of this size, to take that time out and tell us about this movie. But I grabbed about, 25 minutes or so of the most interesting stuff from his conversation with us, and you'll hear like a Q&A portion of the conversation where we talk all about the movie and his relationship with the original film and why he wants to make this movie and all sorts of good stuff. So here is Jon Favreau.
So now we're more doing character design and R&D and developing environments. So the work is more exploratory with MPC at this point and servicing the pipeline, and then it will become about refining it and making it look beautiful as we go on and really zeroing in on it. And I made sure we had lots and lots of time to do that in our schedule, because that's where I don't think people understand, especially people when you get to the further and further up the ranks, that just because you can change things later, and sometimes you're taking the risk of compromising the quality. And I find that what the flexibility of digital production has done is given opportunity for people to postpone being decisive. Because it used to be if you built a big animatronic dinosaur, you had to make sure you got that shot right and it framed right and it worked. And you could fix some things in the editing room, like Jaws. You could if you're a genius, you could work around things like Spielberg did. But for the most part, and then something started to happen where the visual effects became more and more convincing, and there were more people doing them, and the price came down. A lot of times you'll be on a set and people say, "Okay, here it is. Let's just shoot a plate and we'll figure it out." And well, that has to be figured out later. And then if somebody sees that, doesn't like it, and wants to change it, it becomes it becomes a challenge. And so part of this experiment is to see if we really lock in early, as animated films do, and spend all of our time refining. And really, but which isn't to say that we don't examine story, because really what animation, going back to Walt and the process that he innovated, and Pixar and Disney Animation and all the successful animation houses now do, is you have a story department and teams of people who are really challenging the story before you ever commit to anything digital. And so that's something we really wanted to emulate here. And plus we were working off of a story that works really well. So just to answer the question, the more we looked at it and the more we challenged the story, there were certain things that needed addressing to make it feel more appropriate to this medium. But as far as the characters, the story, the themes, the music, we really felt that people were very connected to the original. And so hopefully if you are a fan of the original, you'll look at this and say, oh, it's this, I feel like I saw Lion King. Just like when you see the stage play, you still feel a connection to the animated film. But if you really look closely, you'll realize that we're actually taking a lot of liberties with it, and we're even changing things slightly with scenes and structure and the humor, and then the music is being, although we're staying true to the original soundtrack, working with Hans Zimmer, who would like another crack at some stuff too. That because that was we look back at Lion King and remember it as a classic, but at the time it was there were a lot of challenges facing it, schedule-wise, budget-wise, and people were at early points in their career, and now they know it well, and it's an opportunity to allow them to bring more to it. But there are images that we know we need to have because they're just indelible. They're in our minds.
Hey everybody, it's Ben, just jumping in for a little bit of context here. At this point in the set visit, Favreau showed us essentially the first teaser that people saw at D23, and then he showed us a brief clip that is basically, it's not a clip that appeared in the movie, it was just a visual effects test that they did featuring Rafiki. It was indistinguishable from any nature documentary I've ever seen. It looked fantastic. So when we come back into the audio in just a second, it will be after he showed us that clip, and I think at one point later on in this interview he mentioned something like the Rafiki footage or what you just saw or something like that. So I just wanted to sort of give you guys the full picture of what we saw there. And now back to Jon Favreau.
Okay, there's something we're definitely hitting the next, whatever that next thing is. We're there, and some of it is the rendering tools, and some of it, but a lot of it I think is the artistry. A lot of it is the animator knowing not to push it too human because it gets weird. Especially when it's that photoreal, it could get weird. So you want to keep it, and that's why we do combinations of studying what real animals do and having keyframe animators who know how to present it, and having lighting situations that are realistic, and designs of the environments that are realistic. And it's one of those things where the weakest link is what ruins you, and so it's just figuring out what the weak link is and just either making creative choices to avoid things we can't do well yet, or seeing something like that and letting us lean into, wow, this character could really hold up to this type of camera work, and these lenses are what looks good. And so we're doing this with all our characters, and it just is it's very exciting to be involved with not just a movie like this where people are curious and want to know what we're doing. That's fun. I'm a little spoiled from the Marvel stuff too, where people are really care and are anticipating what you do. That's fun because you feel like you're Gandalf showing up at the fireworks. It's a big treat. But also to be able to use these tools and technologies that aren't really being used to depict these kind of images. It's mostly being used for the stuff it takes a lot of people to do that, and that makes it expensive. And so the types of movies that use this level of technology are generally movies with a lot of action, explosions, spaceships, hard surfaces, superheroes. And I think it's great because it helps push it. I'm a fan of those movies too. But it is nice to be able to be in this part of the garden where we can say, hey, let's really look at what a leaf looks like, or the way water moves, or the way wind blows grass, and create just really beautiful, arresting images. And what amazes me is that there's not a lot going on with those tests of Rafiki there, but I'm riveted. There's something inherently interesting and captivating about seeing that level of simulation, and so that's going to inform our storytelling as much as anything. Because when we look at the pencil sketches, we have to remember that's what it's going to look like. So let's let the music play. Let's let the cuts. Let's not be worried about it getting boring. Let it breathe a little bit. And it gives us confidence to make filmmaking decisions that you normally wouldn't get to make until you unless you're looking at real footage that went through a camera, and then you see that in the editing room. Here we have to kind of guess how it will turn out. Any questions about any of this?
Sorry.
I'll get to all of you. Go ahead.
I'm actually curious about mouth movements because it's gotten so unbelievably photorealistic. I mean, that's like mind blowing. So when you have them speaking, was there a particular animal that posed a problem?
In Jungle Book, we found certain animals were easier than others. The wolves were hard, and the bears were harder because I think they had big snouts. But we found with Bagheera and Shere Khan, because big cats have kind of more anthropomorphic faces, it wasn't as distracting. And we found the level of subtlety that we needed for the phonums. And also it's interesting because we were listening on the additional materials on Bambi. They read transcripts from the writers' rooms, and Walt Disney was wrestling with this same thing because they were going from Snow White to Bambi and trying to go photoreal at the time. And one of the conclusions they reached is, don't have the adults talk. When the kids talk, it's easier than when the adults talk, or cut around it. And so there's like actually tricks that they were coming up with from back then dealing with the same problem. I think what's encouraging is it never felt like it took you out of it on Jungle Book. And so that makes us feel comfortable that we can do it here. The animals accept the speaking more. And also the singing. I'm very lucky that the iconic song, of all these iconic songs, if you think about it, Circle of Life is not sung on screen. Can You Feel Love Tonight's not sung on screen. They're part of the score. So you have Can't Wait to Be King, and you have Hakuna Matata, and I think we get a pass on Hakuna Matata. It's kind of fun. So if we can make that, I think we could sell it. I'm pretty confident with that. It was the thing I was most worried about with Jungle Book, though. Yeah.
Jon, you've worked with, cutting-edge filmmaking tools for a while now, but it keeps changing, and you keep having to keep in step with it. Mm-hmm. Talk a little bit about balancing that, that technical expertise that you need to have to make movies like this with those creative fundamentals and the creative inspiration that you're trying to bring to a high-tech process like
I try to take the lesson from the animators and what they say, and I believe them, is it's story always first. So start with good story, start with subjective, emotional filmmaking, and let the tools service that. And then if you see that you could do a certain magic trick well, stick that in your bag of tricks. But it's not like I have a vision for something and I'm figuring out how to make it happen. Most of the times I'm looking at what works well and figuring out how to creatively work that way. But I'm not if you remember earlier on, I really stayed away from this stuff. Elf was forced perspective, there's no digital effects for any of the scaling differences in there. There's some visual effects at the end with the reindeer, but I tried to do everything. And even Zathura was motion control models for the most part and practical sets. And, I used digital work to help things along, and then we used it for some of the creatures. But I always felt that was, you were always better off filming something real. Even Iron Man, I had real suits and sometimes digital, and that's where I started to feel like, okay, now it's, for hard surfaces, we're there. I can't tell the difference. And then as we got to Jungle Book with the fur and all of that, I started to feel really good about that. Water, even the fire. So I start to, it almost, once the tech proves itself to me, then I consider it part of my, a tool I can use. But I'm still ultimately skeptical about, to me, the best visual effect is one you don't know is there, not one that draws attention. It's like it's the same thing with photography. If anybody's saying, what a great shot, it means they're not really immersed. I like when a great shot helps you feel more involved, and so I think visual effects are the same way. So I'm tough when it comes to it, because I'm very quick to say I don't buy it yet, or I think we could do better, or we have a better shot. We've done better before, and that comes from the chef training from working on Chef. Is if you hold the whole group to a high standard that they could achieve, then and there's a pride that comes with that as they see how good the work is. It starts to build on itself, and then having gone through the battle with a lot of these people already, and giving them the room and respect to do what they do and let them do it well and not rush them, and whenever possible, then it's I find that you get it turns into something really, really nice. And because the tools aren't that different. Everybody's using Maya, everybody's using similar rendering equipment, so it's really about the artists and appreciating them and hiring great ones and letting them do their work and not treating them like they're another piece of equipment, but that they're partners in filmmaking.
So when you talk about this as incorporating so many elements of live-action filmmaking and being in many senses a live-action film, even though the end result, everything is going to be created on a computer, at that point, is it still meaningful to talk about a distinction between live-action and animated films?
Well, it's difficult because it's neither really. I mean, it would it depends what standard you're using, because there's no real animals and there's no real cameras and there's not even any performance that's being captured. That's underlying data that's real. Everything is coming through the hands of artists. But to say it's animated, I think, is misleading as far as what the expectations might be. And it also changes the way you sit and watch it, because hopefully it won't feel you could just watch it without it being introduced. If we put up that Rafiki footage and then say what it was, some people might know, some people might not know how it was done, but it would be it causes you to be present and mindful and pay attention because you're trying to figure out what you're looking at. And that's a great disposition to be in as an audience member. I remember when I saw Gravity, I didn't know what I was going to expect. I just heard it was cool. I didn't know how they did half the tricks, and I was completely drawn in by it. And it was the experience I remember going to movies for when I was little. Like it just washes over you. I think calling it live action is also not appropriate either, because it sounds like we're trying to present something that isn't accurate. And I don't know what we're going to call it. You have a.
Well, no, we were wondering what would you call it.
I don't know. But it becomes. But remember, things have to sort of fit into one clickable headline, so it's hard to have the nuance. And that's why I'm glad you all came here to see it. And as if people are curious and they want to message it and figure out what it is, it comes through. Ultimately, we speak through you. Yeah.
Well, I would offer it's a much more sophisticated, naturalistic form of animation. And that's going to inform your story, too. So
it does, but if we tell the story as you would an animated film, it would be very intense. So we're actually making adjustments. We're treating it creatively like a live-action story as far as what we're presenting and what we expect the imagery to be. But I think you're probably onto it. I mean, it's some version of that, because the people who really want to get under the hood. I also don't want to take away from the people who are in there really making these characters come to life with their fingertips. So, part of it's being accurate, part of it is being appreciative of my collaborators, because this more than any other filmmaking is I'm sitting at the top of this, this huge collection of creative partners, and it's humbling, because you're helping to steer it and guide it and manage it, but really it's the flashes of inspiration and these wonderful grace notes that give it the quality that I get to stand here and present. But really I'm part of a very big collection, a synergistic team that and that in and of itself, especially as I get older, that makes me very proud that I could be part of that and help that thing reach its potential.
What is it about the story that personally that you want to tell with this version?
I think I want to highlight really what's in there from the original, and it's the whole circle of life, and bad things happen, good things happen. There's a lot of not every scene in the movie is fun to watch. There's tragedy in it. But ultimately, what I like about it is that somehow after that whole experience, you walk away feeling inspired and hopeful, which is how I like my stories. Everybody's different. It depends where you put the comma. If you end after Mufasa dies, different movie. But I really like how, and as I go through the dialogue, and especially hearing James Earl Jones say the lines, because he's the one character that actually is in both films, ours and the old one. It's moving. It still gets me, and the music also has a lot of soulfulness in it. And then there's something about, and we're really, as we do the music, as the stage play did, really exploring further what the roots of the music are, and because it's just such a tremendous emotional power and spiritual impact to hearing the choirs sing, and there's something that feels very very ancient and powerful to it, and that Hans and Elton John and the whole team somehow tapped into this wonderful thing that when you hear it, I mean, I knew part of it when we did that teaser was like, as long as you have the sun coming up and you hear those first notes, like I'm already leaning forward, and then we just have to make sure that everything we show either references the old film, there's memories for people who never saw it, and interesting for people who memories for people who saw it, and just cool images for people who never saw any of it.
When you showed us some early footage from The Jungle Book, you said that one of the reasons that you decided to create the environments digitally was so that you could sort of recapture the dreamlike quality of the original movie.
Yeah.
The Lion King animated movie doesn't have that same surreality, so
Right.
how did that alter your approach to this?
I think we want to, I mean, seeing the early test stuff we have, I think you could make, if you use the right lenses and the right camera speeds and the right lighting and the right editing and music and sound, you can make it dreamlike because the real stuff is pretty dreamlike. So I think because it's Africa, it's a different thing and it's a different tone of story too. This feels like myth, you know, and even though there's, and I think that's part of it is creating a tone that feels consistent for this medium, which you get away with other goofier humor, more violent stuff too, because a cartoon kind of sands those edges down. With live action, you have to be more decisive about things like humor and intensity of violence, because they will get very extreme and not feel like part of the same film. So a lot of it is just being the shepherd of the tone of it and the ride of it, and then ultimately when you walk out, for you to say, "Yeah, I just saw that's what I remember about the old one." And if it's the first thing, if you're thinking of introducing your kid to Lion King for the first time, that they're going to be seeing Lion King if you bring them here, and then they'll want to go home and watch the cartoon, or they'll want to go see the play, or be in the play, like my kids.
Caleb's one of the great live-action cinematographers
Yes.
of all time. I was just curious what specifically you wanted him to bring to this type of filmmaking.
I think because it's because so much of what he brings is done through lighting and framing, that I think of scenes like, you know, after after Mufasa dies, spoiler alert, after Mufasa dies, you're going to have the little cub and the parent laying there. How do you show that image without it feeling? Because if you just showed it like you would in a documentary, I don't think it would have a different impact. And so that's one of the things, is just facing the tonal challenges and giving it a visual lyricism that he does seemingly effortlessly. Also, his enthusiasm to engage this new technology and be there and be in the trenches and help innovate. So on the one hand, he's being taught how to use these tools. On the other hand, he's explaining to people who've never been on a film set how lighting works. And as he's dialing in the lights digitally, he's passing that on. And I'm learning from him too. And so by making the tools work well with someone who comes from traditional filmmaking, we then can tap into that whole wealth of experience that he has. And that's a big part of why we built what we built here, is so that you're not forced to deal with, you know, in certain ways you're disrupting filmmaking by offering ways to do it that are, you know, that are different paths to it, but I think equally or more importantly, we're preserving cinematic traditions and bringing people in who come from live action film sets and giving them a tool set for them to then bring that tradition forward. Because people get very hung up on the technical stuff, even when you're looking at 3D animation. It's what kind of rendering, you know, what kind of rendering machine are you using? What are you, you know, really it's about the people. It's about the people who are using those tools. It's like, if you ever tried to use Photoshop, I mean, these beautiful things we have up here from Photoshop, but I try to use Photoshop, it looks like a, you know, SpongeBob. You know? So it's just giving more and more refined tools to people who have skills, and then building those tools around those skills. And so we do it for visual effects, but we're also doing it for everything you saw in there. And so Caleb is, you know, to me, that's the epitome of that confluence, that synergy. And also, it's all about attitude, because this could get frustrating, because sometimes you're in there, it's like being he's like a test pilot. You know, you're building a new engine for the first time to make this thing fly faster than any plane has flown. Sometimes that plane's going to be on the runway, and you're going to have to come back tomorrow. And so we do, you know, there's a lot of that, because we're laying down the train tracks as we're rolling down the track.
You've talked a lot about honoring the original film and staying true to it, how does having these new performers and voice actors sort of reiterate these iconic characters?
One of the things I think I've been very lucky with and have done well is casting throughout my career. And so in this case, I feel very that I'm equally grateful on this one. Let's put it that way. They're just wonderful, and to find people who can sing and can perform and can remind you of and echo the performances that you remember, but also bringing something new and fresh and feeling like it's from 2019 when it's coming out. Like it feels very current, but it also feels connected. And having James Earl Jones, I think, really helped with that connection. But we have a wonderful cast that's, and I'm there with my biting my nails, waiting until we laid it all out. But now we've recorded everything, and I feel very. We haven't done all the music yet, but we've done we've recorded all the performances, and I feel really good about it. So I don't know if that answers your question, but it's something that hung heavily over me, but I think will be one of our strong suits, and it's good because we're not changing that much, so it's good to have the things you are changing work, and that's one that I think you will enjoy.
I mean, that sort of goes to my question too. Is on a skeletal level, obviously you said the movie works and it's going to be like Lion King, you have these stuff, but you have to justify it not just on the technical level, on the story level. So how much change is there? I know you probably don't want to talk specifics, but
there's it depends how well you know it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how much did we change in Circle of Life? Yeah. Some of you might say, oh, that's shot for shot, but if we really looked at it, it's not. But what you remember is going to be in the movie.
Right.
Let's put it that way. And then there's stuff, and that's something I learned on Jungle Book too, and even to some extent on Iron Man, which is like, before we study the movie, the old movie, let's write down everything we know and everything we remember. And what are the things that we have to do? And it's a much longer list on Lion King because everybody watched it in their minivan, in the back of their minivans on DVD over and over again, right? The millennials grew up with this, and then, and even I've seen it lots, and I was an adult when it came out. So I think part of it is just understanding the way memory works and what expectations are, and then being able to do things like, I think we could plus the humor here. I don't think this joke holds up as well. I think we could change the characterization of this character to feel more consistent with the rest of the film, or more current and don't feel like it's doesn't feel like it's something from a different era. And so a lot of it is that. And then of course with the music, it's just like, take it away. Let's just do. I know it sounds one way on the album, but if we could do it better in the live show, if we could do better in the concert, let's do that. And so, seeing that we really have to blow people away with the music and with the effects and the visuals and the casting. That's really and then if we add a scene here or there, or remove a song or remove a scene, make sure that it flows in and that it's something that makes it play better. But I'd say we're staying very, very close to what you think it's going to be.
Okay, that will do us for today's edition of Slash Film Daily. You can find more of all of the stories we mentioned on today's podcast linked in the show notes, along with a piece showcasing what is the one shot in this movie that was actually filmed in live action. There is actually one shot. So I guess technically you can call this not an animated movie because of that. Is that why he did it? I don't know. Anyways, you can find that in the show notes. You can find more of us on Slash Film. You can find this podcast, Slash Film Daily, published on iTunes, Google, Overcast, Spotify. Please send us your feedback, questions, comments, concerns to us at peter@slashfilm.com. And please rate and read this podcast on iTunes. Tell your friends. Spread the word. And we'll see you tomorrow.